In this week's episode, we're in conversation with host of Microsoft Mechanics, Jeremy Chapman, who's also a director of deployment at Microsoft. And he's got some great advice on how to handle alligators and how to install Windows while jumping out of a plane. I'll have to think about that one. He also talks about a great inspirational piece of advice that he once received from Mark Russinovich. So you want to know more? Well, you better stick around. Greetings YouTubers, welcome back to the channel. Andy Malone, Microsoft MVP, as well as a Microsoft certified trainer. So nice to see you here, especially if this is your first visit. This week we've got something really exciting. A couple of weeks ago I was fortunate enough to interview the director of deployment and also host of Microsoft Mechanics, Jeremy Chapman, and he shares some great insights into how he got started in IT, life behind the scenes at Microsoft, and how you can enhance your career with some fantastic tips and advice. So definitely watch the whole interview. We've got some great stuff here. And he also shares a great story and some advice he once received from Mark Russinovich. So stick around and find out what that is. So if you've not subscribed to the channel, of course, we love subscribers. So hit that like button as well as the subscribe button and ring the bell, and then you won't miss out on any future goodies. All right. So if you've got questions, comments about this or any of my other sessions, of course, please get them down below, as we love that. All right. And what more can I say? Jeremy, over to you. Tell us all about yourself and what you do at Microsoft.
Great. It's great to see you again, Andy. And yes, I've been a long-time deployment enthusiast and also practitioner. Before I joined Microsoft, I actually did that in IT, deploying Windows to larger organizations, and then moved into solution accelerators, which is probably one of my favorite jobs I've had at Microsoft, to build out solutions like business desktop deployment, what became the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. So long history there, and always love doing kind of deep technical content at Microsoft.
Fantastic. So you head up the Microsoft Mechanics. Where did that come from, that kind of name? It's got like an engineering theme to it. Where did you come up with that?
Yeah, so Microsoft Mechanics, it started out with what we called the Garage series for Office. So the fun thing was, I was doing Windows deployment, and I was working with you actually for a long time, and some of the engineering leaders, you remember Michael Beck and those folks. But basically, in the Office kind of 2013 timeframe, when Office 365 was renamed, that an unfortunate name prior to Office 365, I would say, but they said, we're going to use application virtualization to repackage the way Office is deployed and delivered, and it's going to be different. And it's using this thing called click to run. So basically, that team kind of enticed me, recruited me over into Office to say, like, help us, build this so it's enterprise ready. It has all the controls that you need to automate deployment, all the policy settings and everything else. And so then we started Mechanics. At the time it was called Garage. And it was really based on some research that we did where people thought, it's Office 365. Everything must be running in the browser. Oh no, my machines aren't always online and connected. This is never going to work. So, really that was about like educating, and it was fun. Educating that the bits, the binaries, were actually going to install in local disk. They're going to go into the program files directory, as you would expect. It was just basically the delivery, the packaging that changed in terms of Office, and the activation changed as well. It became subscription activation. But now, you can do perpetual and volume activation with click to run too. But our origins were really like, how do we get this thing that's kind of scary for a lot of people? Because if you didn't know, like the MSI packaging format actually was developed for the Office, for the Office packages in the early 2000s. Then we developed this kind of click to run app V-based packaging for the kind of 2013 timeframe. And then, we just basically were all about how do we explain to people this is going to work when I'm in offline modes and, when my computer's not connected to the internet. And that's really where it all started. And then we had to show, like, you can use System Center Configuration Manager, which is obviously Endpoint Manager now, but you can use these tools to deploy it, and all of those things work. and in your policy controls, your application, I would say your com add-ins and those types of things, any customizations that you make would continue to work. And so that was what season one, kind of the garage, was all about, and kind of where we started. And then it kind of blew up, and it was like, okay, well, now that we've started kind of teaching people or helping people understand how Office, the rich clients working, let's just expand that out to the rest of Office 365, because Exchange and SharePoint and all these things, those were things also that had a ton of control, a ton of configuration. And so we wanted to tell those stories, and it kind of grew and mushroomed from there to other product groups and other teams. And then, so the next one that came on was Surface, and then Azure, and then Windows. The Windows product group at the time was kind of the last to join the mechanics set of commercial products. Then they joined as well. So it's been a fun kind of several year journey in terms of starting out with this premise of the cloud isn't a scary thing. It doesn't have to always be connected to the internet. And let's prove it out through kind of experimentation and real life scenarios and demos and whatever we can do to really, to the most skeptical audience. And I'm one of one of the most skeptical people that wants to see it run. And that's what we're all about. And that's what it's always been about for mechanics.
Fantastic. Awesome. And you were just talking there about subscription software. So in the days of yore, the old days, as we call them, there was a lot of, there was that big controversy about moving away from kind of license, putting in that license key, to this idea of this subscription, this perpetual subscription. What kind of reaction did you get from customers with that?
At the end of the day, what happens is users do want modern technology. They want to have the latest features, and and I've worked with a lot of like just Power BI or Excel or even like PowerPoint enthusiasts in any role that I've been in. And if you just imagine starting a job right now and having to use, say, Office 2013 or 2010 or '07, it's like working with having not all of the features and capabilities that you expect, especially if you've got this stuff running at home. So how do we get people onto more modern stack of technology, making sure not just that they've got all the features and capabilities, but also when you think about like just the security landscape and how much it's evolved. So you have to make sure that things are patched, that things are up to date and locked down and secure. And the way to do that, I think, is just to make sure that you're on a constant cadence and rhythm of getting these updates. And so the thing that makes sense in that case is to have like that subscription style service where you're always up to date, you're always getting the latest tech and the latest features, the latest security updates, quality fixes, all of these things. And that's really where I think everything evolved to.
Looking back, how did you get started, by the way, in Microsoft? What was your story?
Yeah, so I'd been working. It's funny. I started working in IT in Europe, in Germany. My first job was with an incubator that was there doing incubation pre-bubble bursting, kind of in the late '90s, early 2000s, and I was running their IT. So it was kind of right out of college, and I studied not 100% computer science. I was studying business and other topics, but I've always had this inclination to do IT and to work with systems, build applications, all the things that kind of go along with that, run computer labs and stuff at university, et cetera. Did a lot of device imaging kind of in the early crazy days when things weren't that sophisticated. And so when I got to Germany, it was like, okay, you're going to manage all of this stuff. And it was a pretty, it was a mid-sized company, I would say, 20 or so employees. But I was responsible for that right out of school, and it was kind of weird. It was kind of crazy. And then I was responsible for their website, and then it kind of grew and it got bigger and bigger. And then when I left that organization, I went to work in China for Bertelsmann. I was doing app development in Shanghai. I started to really, love and get into building applications, doing, big deployments, making sure that things would scale and all of that stuff, and building out the right data backends and stuff for some of the apps. But then from there, I went to Microsoft and started out in the server and tools business, working on basically the solution accelerators or system center team, building out Windows deployment solutions and other things like Windows Server System Reference Architecture and other stuff that I had worked in kind of in my previous life, and then kind of expanded that at Microsoft full time. And then from there, I went to Windows and did imaging and deployment and compatibility, and that was kind of, I think, with the time that we met. And then after that, going into Office and modern work, and now expanding that out to the rest of kind of commercial Microsoft. And that was my path, I guess, from starting out in college and working, as a foreigner kind of in Germany as a basically a student dropped in doing their IT, and now I'm looking at across Microsoft for data and AI and Azure and Windows and all, Office and Microsoft 365 and all these different workloads. And I love that because it always, I'm always researching and making sure I stay up to date and up to speed with all of the new technologies when they ship.
Awesome, fantastic. And I mean, kind of just give us an insight of what you're working on at the moment. What kind of stuff are you doing at the moment?
Yeah. So at any given time with mechanics, we have a dozen or half a dozen to a dozen different shows that we're developing and different topics. So these are spanning from, for example, we'll work on everything from like the data story, which is one that we're working on now. We just released something for, robotic process automation, hosted RPA bots with Power Automate. We're getting ready to, and in the next couple of days, we'll release something for Microsoft 365 apps and update management, something that I was very close to in the both kind of from the engineering and specification side all the way to delivering that back in 2013 and its evolution since then. And then we also will work on stuff like quantum compute and some of the really futuristic stuff as well. And it's like language switching, when you go from a deep data topic to a deep client side topic to a deep AI or quantum or something that's a bit more on the research side. You're just basically context switching the entire time between those, and it kind of, I think it keeps the neurons firing in the brain just to make sure that you can do this, because every time you'll go out of, say, a Viva meeting for like a Viva announcement, and that's great, it's a great product and it's about like the employee experiences, but then from there we'll jump into a whatever 400 level discussion about data and architectures and why Postgres Citus can now scale better than it could before. And so it's just a completely different world. Every hour kind of changes like this for me, but I love it. I think that's the part that keeps me on my toes and excited. So I've never kind of scaled into one small little box of stuff. I've always got this whole end to end 360-degree view of what's going on.
Wow. And I'm just thinking, like, everybody who's watching this, I mean, they're probably kind of feeling like, oh my God, I'm constantly chasing my tail. I'm constantly trying to learn new stuff. And as we all are, it seems that the technology is moving faster. Maybe I'm just getting older, but maybe, the tech is just moving faster and faster, and you've got to work harder and harder. I mean, the pressure on you must be immense, surely, because you're at the top of the game, if you will.
Yes, there's always something going, but I guess the trick there is to say, like, when you don't have enough cycles or enough bandwidth to deliver against something, and then deciding like which one takes priority versus the other one, because you're going to have so much capacity, and you've got maybe 10 people knocking on your door for 10 different things, but maybe you can do 7 things. So then it's all about deciding what are those 7 things that are the most important. And that's been the trick and the thing to try to play and really schedule our time, and to make sure that we're really doing the best that we can to drive the most important topics at the company. There's some things obviously that will go viral that we will have missed because there's so much stuff going on at any time at Microsoft. But for the most part, we're trying to stay with those major tier one announcements and deliver for, again, for the most skeptical audiences out there. What is it? Why should I care? Why, how do I implement it? What's the experience going to look like? I want to see demos. These are all the things that I care about, and hopefully the things that you care about too. And that's what we're trying to really pack into anything for mechanics.
Um, I actually had a number of questions on my channel and talking about deployment. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And what advice would you give to somebody? I know I've got guys saying, Andy, do I learn endpoint manager, system center config manager? Do we stay on premises? Do I learn that kind of traditional deployment? You've been there. Do I focus purely on the cloud? What advice would you give somebody there?
If you're talking about like disk imaging and that type of deployment,
Yeah.
I say that never goes away. But I guess the way to think about that for me, at least, is you should have some exposure to for example, if you're managing an email server, or if you're managing, deployment from the imaging format and style of that with various tools, and it kind of started out in the old days of things like Ghost, and then it moved into WIM files and what we can do in Config Manager and with MDT and those things. You do need some. I think it is nice to have some of that background just to know like what your alternatives are if something goes south, or DISM doesn't apply the image, and that's part of the service that that Windows is using as part of even out of box experience. It's good to have some of that understanding of the core tools and functionality.
I think
But I
so.
think the way that I would tackle deployment, and especially on the Windows side, it's for me, it's about always trying to start with a small base and layering on your policies, your applications, and doing that in a thoughtful way. We were just having this conversation actually about autopilot. So autopilot at its core is an enrollment mechanism into Endpoint Manager, Intune. And so it's not doing the things that a task sequence of your would do. A task sequence of your has exit codes, and when the exit code hits zero, the next task starts, and all of these things. With Intune, I mean, you basically have a policy engine, you have an apps engine, and you have other engines that run as part of that experience. So it doesn't like replace that task sequence, very sequential modality that you can do through Config Manager MDT. So I guess nutshell is cloud deployment makes a lot of sense. I think starting with a core Windows image and then layering on the apps that you need. Things have gotten easier. Drivers have got more uniform and better and more serviceable through Windows Update and in those channels. So I think it's a lot easier now to have the same level of quality at the end and not have to worry about all of the kind of the task sequencing stuff that you and I spent so many years working on.
The reason I talk about that is I think there's been, as an instructor, I've found that, the messages coming out of Microsoft, coming out of VMware, it's, cloud, 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 cloud. All the courses are cloud based. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, you look at so many companies today, and so many are in hybrid. So they've either got,
Mm-hmm.
hybrid Windows, they've got hybrid Exchange, hybrid deployment.
Yep.
And, I'm thinking there's so many kids coming out of school today, they're not going to have these skills because the courses are not there. So it's really important. Yes, the cloud is great, but don't also ignore those fundamental on-premises skills. And that's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah.
what you're saying.
100%. Same thing.
You
I would
know,
say same thing with like SQL. You might learn in a complete open source database, set of tech in school or in the university, but when you get into business, you might have SQL servers that you have to manage. So you don't want to ignore like T-SQL and knowing that language. And
absolutely.
also Office, same thing. Like you might grow up with, the Google suite of applications and web apps to do your editing and everything in university or in high school or whatever college. But then when you get into the workplace, a lot of times those will change, and it will go both ways, obviously. But you want to make sure that you've got enough comfortability in both, and that you're kind of ambidextrous and that you can move between them relatively easily. And that's, by the way, that's kind of one of the reasons I got onto YouTube, because anything that I want to learn, I hit YouTube, and I've been a car enthusiast and do a lot of home improvement and all of those things too. Mechanics is not just a thing that we work on at work, but that's kind of how my whole life is around reverse engineering stuff and trying to disassemble, reassemble, fix, things. And I started with cars, and I do the same thing with my house. But like everything, that you can learn on YouTube, you can really, that gives you that ambidextrous or that dexterity, that kind of ability to move between workload and workload, or technology and technology, that we didn't have in the past. That was really hard. You remember, you and I probably both have a shelf of these really thick 2,000-page
Yeah,
Microsoft
yeah,
books
just
about,
down there.
yeah. And that's what everything was. And you'd have to spend like a weekend or two reading through that stuff. And then you thought, okay, I feel pretty good about this. Now I just search in, Google or in YouTube search, and I find, this
Yeah,
tip or this thing to do
instantly.
the job.
Yeah,
Boom, I know it. And the nice
yeah,
thing and it's like with scripting, and I always joke about scripting, how that script works, and you memorize that command the minute that you write the PowerShell script, but then it kind of exits my brain, and I don't need to even think about that or unlock that again for another 2 or 3 years then I'll come back to it and be like, oh, okay, that's the commandlet to do that. But it's one of those things where because it is so fleeting, you can just get to whatever you need pretty much on YouTube, and that's been a reason why we use that as one our anchor channel basically for mechanics
I
too.
was also going to mention, by the way, that Jeremy is you've got your own little baby YouTube channel as well. And this is
Yeah,
your
yeah.
little pet project. There's some cool stuff on there. You do some great tech reviews and also not just on actual tech, but you also do some great hardware reviews as well. So,
Yep.
and you've just hit a thousand subscribers. Well done. That's
I did
fantastic.
hit 1,000. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's been fun. A lot of it's for experimentation. I'll be completely honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
To work from home. So 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, before March of 2020, I
Yeah.
was driving to the office every day. Now I'm driving into the office basically to film things for mechanics or for the occasional team meeting. But I'm at home 90% of the time, and so it was all about like trying to translate the learnings and the things that I say learnings. That's a Microsoft word, isn't it? Sorry about that, everybody who's watching. We don't put an S on learning typically. It started on the mechanics channel. I was doing some things like one thing I saw all the time was that people didn't know how to turn on their video with audio or share audio. And it was just like every day I'd be on a call and somebody would say, I've got this video here. I have no idea if you can hear it, but I'm going to share this video or something. And then so I would like say, okay, stop sharing, go to this checkbox that says share system audio or whatever. And so I did that as kind of one of my first videos, I think, on the during the pandemic. And that thing blew up. I mean, it's got like
Yeah.
600,000 views or something. And it
Wow.
because our channel's pretty big, but that was a very useful tip. Problem was, regrettably, I was on a, potato camera at the time, whatever it was, because you couldn't get webcams even at the time. And my camera was terrible compared to the Sony that I have in front of me right now. And so kind of as I learned and as I grew into it, I wanted to move that stuff off of mechanics as our quality bar is going to be a lot higher than I can do at home. And so I started kind of reviewing it, and it kept getting more and more interesting. And I remember like because we had the whole stack of Logitech cameras, for example, and so yeah, so I started kind of reviewing all of those things, looking at different audio products as well, and then also if there is a Teams tip, like full screening a Teams meeting is one that kind of came up a lot in questions too. And so there's a way to do that with the web client, and now we've just started rolling that out in the rich client through what's called pop out shared content. So those kind of things I'm looking for, and just again they're usually those types of tips are about 2 minutes long, but then the reviews might be closer to 10 minutes depending on how deep I go on that
Yeah.
particular webcam or
Cool.
product.
I was going to mention, this channel, we get a lot of newbies on the channel.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I get a lot of questions from kind of newbies looking to get started in IT. As kind of where you are at the moment, what advice would you give them?
Find something that you love. I mean, I would say in general, just for all of life, you need to build your niche that you enjoy doing. I mean, there's nothing worse than going to work and kind of doing something just for the 9 to 5, and you hate, whatever technology that you're in. So find something that you love. That's my advice really for basically anything in terms of your career. With technology, if you're just getting started, work your way into the area that you enjoy doing. And that's kind of what I've done with Microsoft, even before I was at Microsoft. And that, for example, I like the breadth, the kind of 360-degree view of doing a bunch of stuff from data to Windows to Office to quantum computing and some of these kind of things, and just having that kind of breadth of view. And some people don't like that, so you typically want to try to work your way into these roles. So if you're really passionate, there's a lot of people passionate about Excel or passionate about Windows. Some people are passionate about Windows deployment. I am, but some passionate about Windows deployment or other topics like that. Make the moves and get into that space that you enjoy doing, and it will make it a lot easier to just continue doing that. But also try to stay ahead of the puck and make sure that anytime that there's new technology, don't just say, oh, it's a great concept and dream, but I don't like it because it's, they didn't think of this and this. This is going to
Yeah,
be true for every kind of new technology, by the way. It's worth kind of going back and kind of seeing how things have progressed. Like, for example, on mobile phones, I try to move between platforms with almost every release of a mobile phone. So I'm very fluent on iOS versus Android, and back to iOS, and then back to Android.
yeah,
And when I was on Windows Phone, obviously I was doing Windows Phone. But that way you kind of stay in tune with what's happening, what's how the progressions are going, and that
yeah.
really helps, I think, in terms of keeping you kind of enlightened to what's there, and then if you do enjoy something like that, something else more that's kind of next to neighboring your area, you can work and move and make the maneuvers to go into that position as well.
Absolutely. And as a follow on from that, I mean, we've been in IT for some time. I remember, we look at the Gates era, the 1990s, personal computing,
Mm-hmm.
client server platform. Then we looked at the noughties with the Balmer years. That was mobile. I would, safe to say that was the mobile years. Whether it was successful or not, who knows. Then Satya, of course, is the cloud era. Yes, so everything's in the cloud. What piece of tech would you say? What's next? What should I be looking at next? And what excites you? Is there anything coming out, any emerging technologies that you think, wow, that's so cool. I really want to get into that?
Wow, there's so much. The space that's kind of super futuristic is quantum, I think, and just really challenging our knowledge of transistor-based compute versus quantum mechanical compute. That one's the furthest out, I would say, in terms of just exciting, weird, and interesting stuff to read about, because it's all probability based and it's all experimentation based and all of these things. Um, Otherwise, I would say that anything that can scale and replicate. I think what we've seen with container-based technology and the cloud native architectures, to me, all of that it's an app package, a container for me in my head, because I come from an app packaging kind of background. But when you can rip 1,000 different containers that are all getting load balanced and handling load, and then pull those back into 10 containers, that to me is exciting. And I think that things that will scale like this, those are for me the exciting part. So that you're basically always able to match the level of compute you need with the demand that you get. And I think, it started early with Docker and some of the early container tech, and now it's getting more sophisticated, but yet it's getting easier to manage things like auto scaling. I just wish I had this kind of stuff back when I was building apps and web experiences when I was in IT full time, because now there's just so many options, and that goes with the data tier, the front end tier, like whatever part of that, of an application or experience you're building. For me, it's I guess it's probably my automation inkling and my deployment background that's saying this, but anything that's doing this kind of auto scaling that can replicate itself 1,000 or 10,000 times, and then unreplicate itself, and you know get the instances back down to a handful. That to me is cool. Like that I think is the space to continue to watch and see how much more efficient it gets. And then there's some other tech I think that's super cool too, which is like, if you look at confidential computing, and you remember Spectre and Meltdown, and
Yeah,
some
yeah,
of the,
yeah.
like, people were literally soldering things in the bus between, say, your DIMMs, your RAM, and your CPU, and showing how theoretically you can pull data off a system that way. And then RAM is kind of the wild, wild west on some level, in that it's not encrypted. It's all kind of plain text typically. And it's just, so if I can do something like a DMA device to grab memory or a memory dump, I can usually read things in the clear. Now we're moving to encrypted RAM, and we're moving to more, areas where we've got secure enclaves and CPUs that you can lock down processes there. And I think we'll probably grow into that being more of a default versus more of a specialty thing that only healthcare and governments and financial services wants to use today. In the future, I think encryption of RAM, which I think is a kind of a fundamental thing that we should have at some point anyway. B, having that kind of secure enclave technology in the processor, whether that's for various application calls, full virtual machines, or containers, or even like secondary level nested vert hypervisors and above. All of that stuff will get more and more secure to just stay ahead of, or try to stay ahead of, the adversaries that are out there from a security standpoint. So
Very
I'm
cool.
always a huge fan of security stuff, deployment, scaling, and then, like I said, quantum compute's probably the most futuristic, weird one, but I'm keeping my eye on that because I think it's fascinating.
Okay, cool. At your time at Microsoft, here's a question. I didn't tell you this one. I'm just throwing this one in. Can you what was your worst day and what was your best day? Can you remember?
One of my best days, I've had a few good days actually, but one of my favorite moments, and this is going to sound super nerdy probably, but there was this tool that I built. If I don't know if you know, like Keith Garner, and you probably know Mark Russinovich
Oh
and
yeah.
Michael Niehaus and those guys.
Yeah.
So there was this thing called XP mode back in the day,
Oh
which
yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't love it because it was a second OS and you had to manage it, and it was
Huh.
a vanilla OS. It didn't have any apps in it, so it was kind of pointless in my opinion because it was like all downside with very little upside. So I created something that was called physical to virtual migration, which would take your XP machine, encapsulate that into a virtual machine, then put it inside of Windows 7, which is kind of, if you think about it now, like 10 years later, it's kind of a nightmare because it's still two OSs to manage at the end of the day. But we would wire up your apps so they would show up in the start menu and that you could get to your old apps while, inside of the new, because it's using like medv or whatever technology to do the app exposure and remote app kind of start menu nesting and stuff. And so I was testing this script out, and then I had to get Mark's Rusinovich's support with it. Keith Garner's a legend in terms of scripting, was working on it for me. He built a lot of the MDT scripts, and I would test this out. And the only way you could test it, because we didn't have nested vert at the time, so you had to use a physical piece of hardware. And so you'd get the machine running, whatever your XP thing, and then you'd put media in it and start to do the virtualization conversion, install Windows, and then it would run its thing and get the VM running inside of the Windows 7 instance, and then do the whole MDT deployment around it. And I remember like I was fighting this because it would always time out or crash, or like, it's typical kind of engineering stuff where you go to battle, and you don't always win these battles, but it was weeks, and I just thought this is never going to work. And we had, Mark did all of his things to get the P2V tool to work, and there was a bunch of like timer jobs and things that had to be part of the task sequence that we built. And I remember one time, after about 3 weeks of just fighting this, I'm in my I had a Volvo convertible at the time, and it was really loud because it's got a canvas top, a C70, and it was just pouring down rain. You know how it gets in Seattle. And so I'm driving from Redmond to where I lived at the time, which is kind of Mukilteo area, which is north of Redmond. And it was dumping down, and this computer is on my passenger seat, and it didn't work for 3 weeks. And finally, like halfway home at Totem Lake area, it completed and the whole thing worked. And I literally like pulled off to the shoulder of the road and just started screaming and crying. And it was like the best moment of my life at the time because
Oh, that's brilliant.
this thing worked, and we'd been fighting it for so long. And then after that, it was kind of downhill. It was easy to get the rest of it to work. And it was I'd say one of the best live demos ever. Is you'd start out in the one XP machine, and then it would take the whole 55 or 60 minutes of a session at Ignite or TechEd at the time. And then it would complete at the end, and you'd see this thing kind of unravel itself and be working. And so that was probably one of the more exciting moments where it was just like I thought it would never work, and it finally worked, and it finally did its thing, like literally on the passenger seat of my car while driving. I'm not sure if that's safe or not, but that's the way it worked
That's a
out.
great story. That's a
But
fantastic
there's been
story.
other moments like when we did, I would say, with mechanics, and before when it was garage, we love Top Gear. So the Top Gear
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
influence,
definitely.
you can see it in the early ones, and we
Yeah.
would go to, like the Louisiana Bayou, and like we'd be on these fan boats doing stuff. And we were joking the other day. There was this live alligator that was we hired a guy that was a alligator like trainer that was one of the only ones in Louisiana or something. And he was like a stunt man body double for Matt Damon and stuff too in
Oh
movies.
wow. Okay.
And so the point of this was to show that like Office will work, offline even in the bayou because there's no Wi-Fi and there's no like mobile connectivity or anything there. There literally wasn't where we were walking around. And so we had this alligator, and it was trained, kind of. But I was supposed to walk by as if I'm like totally enthralled in my phone, like everybody is when they're looking down and doom scrolling their phone these days. But I was trying to get a bunch of work and different items done, and they kept saying, "No, you have to walk closer to the alligator," and they were like, I had to do multiple takes. And this thing's got like whatever a ton of clamping force and could really do some damage if you walk too close to it. And so we kept redoing this. And even if you watch it now, like I never got closer than maybe a meter, 4 feet away from this thing. And they wanted me like right up next to it. So that was pretty fun. And then some of the stuff that we just did on Garage in general, like part of it, because we did all these like kind of stunt things, and it was unfortunate because it was before our channel like got huge, big. It's not huge, but we've got 250 or so thousand subscribers on the YouTube channel,
Wow.
but now I think because we're doing so much, we couldn't do those same kind of stunt or scenario based things that we used to do in the past, but they were fun to do. We installed Office with a guy skydiving out of an airplane. And the funny thing with that is, you remember the old click to run packages in the
Yeah.
beginning? It was using AppV, and it would basically cache enough so that Office could run some core functions, and it would gray out some of the controls that weren't there to run. And so one of the things is people didn't think they could install offline. So we'd basically put the binaries, in the local disk and then start the installation, like in this case, like in an airplane. They would jump out of the airplane to show that Office will install during the 90 seconds of free fall. Because at the time, Office would take like 12 minutes to install on average.
Yeah.
And then by the time he hits the ground, he's got a running set of Office. Well, that's already awesome. And it was all like it was on a Surface. Well, no, it wasn't a Surface device. It was a Samsung or some kind of tablet, like the old Windows 8 kind of
Oh
early
yeah.
day
Yeah.
tablets. That was gaff taped to the skydiver, and then the funniest thing, because it's got a gyrometer. So if you watch the recording back, and we record everything typically with Camtasia, TechSmith, Camtasia software, it's spinning around the whole time because the gyrometer, when you're skydiving, the tablet doesn't even know what orientation it is. So we get this recording back from that to show the Office install, and the thing's spinning like every quarter of a second. So we kept some of that in there, but we had to correct a lot of it in post because you just get sick almost watching the Office install and
Oh wow.
turning. But just that kind of stuff. It was so fun working through
Sounds
those
like a
those days.
it sounds like a Mission Impossible movie,
It
doesn't
was kind of like that. It was kind of like that. So yeah, totally.
it? Final question. Who influenced you most? So, looking back over your career, was there that one person that gave you a fantastic piece of advice, and what was it?
I'll say Mark Russinovich, like hands down. He's one of my heroes anyway. Just Sysinternals and the
Yeah.
fight that he took to the Supreme Court against the some of the music stuff that was tracking people back in the day. He gave me the best piece of advice, especially if you're doing the conference circuit like you and I do. People pay to be there. You have to, respect that. Put on a show. Give them a good experience. Like this is something that, and it's the same thing if you're building like YouTube content or anything. They're giving you their time. Like anybody who's watching right now is giving us their time. It's got to be good. It's got to be worthwhile. It's got to be worth it. And especially if you're doing conference stuff, you're either taking time off work, you're traveling with airfares and hotels, you're leaving your family behind, all of these things. Take it seriously. Do everything that you can do to prep and make sure that it is the best it can be for that person attending. Like whoever's there has just done so much to sacrifice their time, their money, etc. Just give them a great experience. And so Mark, you think about even things like tools like Zoom It. He taught me how to clean up my taskbar and the desktop backgrounds and all these things, maybe not directly, but watching his content. I remember I was like a kid in a candy store when I'd walk into his sessions early on, like he's zooming into stuff and his environments are always so clean and it's so nice and it's so well done. That's just what everybody, in my opinion, who's doing like tech, tech explaining and kind of showing people how things work should do and take seriously and make sure everything looks as uniform as it can and clean as it can, from the viewer's perspective. And think about like in a room, like good zoom it kind of plug as well. Like people need to see it in the back of the room. And if you've got, say, maybe a 10-foot tall monitor, sometimes in a good day, and you're like 100 feet back,
Yeah.
even with the best eyesight in the world, you're not going to be able to see what's going on. So just be mindful of all those things so that people can view and enjoy and learn from your content as you display it. And then I would say the other thing that Mark's done that's been amazing is like staying like ahead of technology trends. Like you saw him move from Windows into Azure, and now he's doing his own like almost incubation stuff. That too is amazing. So I'd say like most influential is probably Mark.
Fantastic, fantastic. Hey, listen, that is absolutely awesome. Okay. Jeremy Chapman, you have been absolutely fantastic for our first guest. Thank you so much for your time. Definitely check out Jeremy's YouTube channel. I'll include the links. We'll put them below. And also definitely Microsoft Mechanics. It's the go-to place that you got to go. I really appreciate your time, Jeremy. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thanks so much, Annie. See you all soon. Bye-bye.
So there you have it. That was my interview a couple of weeks ago with Jeremy Chapman, Director of Deployment and the host of Microsoft Mechanics. I hope that gave you a little bit of insight into what really goes on there. All right. Hey, listen, thanks so much for stopping by. And if you've enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. It really does make that difference as well. And hit the subscribe button and ring that bell and you'll be notified of new videos. All right, that's it for this week. Thanks so much for joining us and for my guest, Jeremy Chapman. I really appreciate it. Okay, you stay safe and I'll see you soon. Take care. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.